Okay, right. I'm all good. I'm into this now. Let's crack on with the next chapter. I think I've got over myself with talking. Right. So let's have a look at the slides that I've got here. So I've called this one Sonic Identity and Sound Worlds. So curating a sound palette. Right. Well, what I mean by that is I don't want to use the word, well, I'm going to use the word, essentially a template. Lots of people use templates, especially probably if you're in the world where you use particular sounds all the time. You might just have your sound, and I get it if you have maybe a template that incorporates orchestral an orchestral work, but a lot of the time when I work on projects, I like to start with nothing. I like part of my process actually is to build the sounds. Now, obviously, this is depending how much time you have, and this relates back to the long form thing where if you have enough time, then it's great. You can kind of organically work on a new batch of sounds, a new palette. And so I did this with both the Nightcrawlers and Making of an Activist and some of the other projects that I've done. And it's part of the bit that it's actually the bit I enjoy the most, is building the sounds, building the sound worlds, finding the identity of the music. Those two projects I mentioned, and there's been a couple of others where time has allowed me to do this because I've come on from the beginning. The Nightcrawlers took 3 years to do-ish. Making of an Activist was a year. The project in between that one was a year as well. So being on from the start just allows you to kind of really take ownership of the sonic identity. Right, so let's move to the next slide. So when I'm talking about sonic identity and sound worlds, when I'm talking about curating a sound palette, I'm essentially like auditioning tonal palettes, finding sounds that I like, sounds that give a mood, things that I like. Just maybe it might be even just one element of it, or it might be having a particular sound that I know I'm going to use. For example, if I'm going to be using a piano, I will load that one up and have it. So that'd be one thing. Then I would maybe experiment and find other areas of instrumentation or sound design or sounds, or it can be very obvious sounds to very kind of random and interesting and unique. It's about experimenting. So exploring the instrumental colors, experimenting. It's going to depend on the palette of the project. It might be, and maybe the direction of the director or creative team, like, it has to be this. So therefore you are restricted to a certain group of sounds, which you can probably then expand on a bit. But so there's all these extra decisions and like aspects to consider. But in this instance, I'm just pretending that it's a blank canvas and we have all free reign. So experimentation is good. And then I would register your decisions, like what works, what doesn't, and by creating a template or multiple templates or a palette, you are almost kind of registering that decision, like, yeah, this is going to be in there somewhere. So you're kind of making a decision there, which, as someone who's very bad at making decisions, that's a workaround that I have to do. Density in space, timbre as a narrative, grouping sounds together as a stack. We'll do that in a second, but just not just the sound, but like, what does it do? What do they do together? What is the output? What am I trying to achieve by choosing these particular sounds? So timbre or aesthetic, another word, it's good to kind of use. And then what am I trying to find in terms of the aesthetic of a sound? And how does that firstly contribute to the narrative, or how does it extend it or expand it? This is one of the most important creative times as well, is finding out the sounds that you want to work with. Now, this may develop throughout the project. I worked on this Nightcrawlers project for 3 years, and things changed. One of the main cues that I wrote, because I wrote the temp music for this one and the Making of Activist, more or less, some of the stuff that was in there from the beginning that I wrote, we swapped out in the end, but it really did help inform what the aesthetic of the whole project was going to be. It has a very big influence on the visuals. Just going back to Marco, if we had a cinematic-y thing, it would be very different from an 80s inspired soundtrack. So both may work depending what the objective, what the intent is of the visuals, but yeah, both can work. It just depends on the intent, essentially. Right, so the other thing I just wanted to mention was grouping sounds together. That's an organizational thing. It's a bit like the markers going from left to right in this sense, but what I'm looking at is I'm looking at grouping like-minded tracks together. Now, firstly, it's to group them so I know that they've all got like their own kind of like team or their own identity, but it's also to keep everything nice and neat and not overwhelming, because if we start opening these track stacks, now I haven't done it for everyone, I should have. So do you know what? This gives me a chance to do it now. So I'm going to highlight the symbols and I'm going to go Command Shift and D, and I'm just going to put it into a folder. So create, and then that will give me symbols. And so now I've got, I know they're all together now. They're all friends hanging out with one another. So obviously I can expand that as and when I need to. Same with the synths. In fact, if I just show you what it looks like without the track stacks, this particular project, firstly, it doesn't fit on the page. And just imagine trying to just like work with this. It's just so hard to do. Like, I'll scroll down to track 79. Okay, back up to 15. So instead, what I like to do is if you track stack them, I essentially put them in their own folders. That looks much more appealing. And what I can do is I can jump into the piano section and work on something in there. And then I can close that and I can go to the rhythmic section, for example, and then move to the orchestral section and just keep it nice and neat. So the other thing I want to do is I'm actually just going to play you this this track, this cue from the Nightcrawlers, and just it's almost like a culmination of all the things that I've talked about already. Markers, so the island, and then water, the left to right organization. So we've got a time signature, which is starts from the beginning of the project. 4/4. We've got a change of tempo. Well, it's a starting tempo really, 76 here within this. I used the tempo just to make sure my starting point was aligned with what I wanted, where I wanted it to be. And then we're going to go through at bar 60. It goes to a 6/4. If my eyes, it's a 5/4. I really should change the color of this. Markers can't see them. Here we go. 5/4. So we've got one bar of 5/4, one bar of 3/4. Yes, they work out as 2 bars of 4/4 on next to each other, but for me, it helped me feel where that that kind of section needed an extra beat in there, and then the section after needed one less. And then we got 5/4 again, 4/4, 2/4, 4/4, 5/4, 4/4, and that just helped me align the composition up with the visuals. And then the other thing is, of course, is can you make that feel natural so it doesn't just stick out? Because that's one thing that you want to avoid, is to bring too much attention to the music in this case, especially if it doesn't sound right. So also the other thing just to mention is that at this point we're at 76 BPM, and then at when the water kicks in, we go up to 78 BPM. And that is just to give it that slightly bit more urgency, and also to align with the end as well. So you'll find a lot of these things that happen, they are multifunctional. So let's listen to this, and what I'll do is I'll kind of like expand and close the track stacks, just to kind of give you a sense of the details. And just to kind of summarize there, it's the reason why is, it's auditioning the tonal palettes, but then grouping them. Exploring and experimenting, this was a result of that. Finding out what was good in terms of shape, the density, the space, what the timbre is, what the aesthetic is of the narrative. And then, again, as a pure organizational thing, grouping them together so we can actually cope, basically. And that was the opening of the film. So, it needed to have its impact. But again, going back to one of the earlier chapters with this was sensitivity as well. So sensitivity to the story and the narrative. Again, the documentary. This was the one that won the Emmy and was shortlisted for Oscars and BAFTAs. And definitely something we talked a lot about in terms of a theme, not music, but just in general, a general theme is to make sure that we are respectful to the material and to not go overboard. So a mature sound, something that sounds sophisticated, but also slightly gnarly, but also organic. And again, with those phrases, auditioning those tonal palettes, having those words there helped locate them, help find them. The film also thematically is a mixture of very rural, I guess organic, again that word, meets with cyberpunk, that kind of Philippines, city of Manila, and so again, contrast of those two things as well. So having that in mind gave me kind of I guess a direction as to where to start with the tonal palettes. But yeah, a lot of experimentation, exploration, finding interesting instrumental colours, but also some kind of rhythmic elements that were more cinematic and more obvious, that helped drive the pace and the momentum. Right, okay, so that is the end of that one. Hope that all made sense. And on to the next. Thanks very much.